Hi, welcome to Tea Time with Rock. My name is Jennifer, and we have Whitney and
Yeah.
Matt,
Matt Schubert.
Matt Schubert.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Whitney Ogle. I'm a associate professor of kinesiology in the School of Applied Health at Cal Poly Humboldt, and I've been studying cannabis and exercise for like since 2017.
So tell me about your podcast.
Yeah, I have a podcast called Exploring Cannabis and Exercise where I talk to both researchers and to people who use cannabis with exercise to educate the public on how people are actually using it. And yeah, so I haven't uploaded an episode in a while, but it's called Exploring Cannabis and Exercise. It's available on all streaming platforms.
Oh, amazing. We'll link it below, and that way everyone can explore it. Okay,
Check it
great.
out.
He's one of the guests.
Yep.
Oh, yay.
Teen.
All right. And I'm Dr. Matt Schubert. I'm an associate professor at California State University, San Marcos, also in the Department of Kinesiology. And I have been studying cannabis and exercise since about 2020.
What made you guys interested in sports and cannabis? Like what was like the first thing that interested you, and what's carried you on so far?
Great question. I think it was one of those things that just in passing, it's probably started out in college and then into grad school, multiple grad schools, where I would talk to my friends and colleagues in the program and we'd have our own questions about cannabis and exercise. But it was always like, oh, I wonder if there's anything on this. And just looking up some research here and there, it was like, there's actually not really any research on this topic. And so it was kind of always for me a dream to do eventually to get into do research where we'd have people under the influence and see how it impacted different parts of exercise performance. And so when I saw the job opening at it was Humboldt State University at the time, we went through a name change recently. And so when I saw the name Humboldt was looking for a professor in my area of expertise, I was like, all right, I've always associated Humboldt with cannabis, and so maybe I can like finally do the research that I've been wanting to do in Humboldt. And so within the first month of me being a professor here, I reached out to the Humboldt Institute of Interdisciplinary Marijuana Research, and it's a collective of different professors from across campus who do different types of cannabis research from like economics to sociology to environmental policy. And so I met up with them in the first month of being a professor and started changing my focus of research almost as soon as I became a professor.
So mine is not anywhere near that cool. Back in when I first started my current position in 2017, I was participating in a lot of functional training, CrossFit type workouts. And in that world, CBD was and is still very big. Um, but I wanted to kind of develop a better understanding of is there any actual scientific data to support the claims that many companies are making about CBD in regards to sleep, recovery, muscle damage. And we designed a couple of muscle damage studies. We didn't get a chance to actually do them because we didn't receive the funding we requested. But we did also, or I just had a PhD student finish some research on CBD. But being a Californian cannabis do kind of have a coexistence. They're tied together fairly well. And as somebody who also deals with chronic pain, I'm interested in, something other than taking four, so 800 to like 1,000 milligrams of ibuprofen a day. Something that might be not as damaging on the liver or the kidneys, like most pain medication can be. And so, yeah, I've just really been curious about what's kind of the interaction with exercise. Is there any potential application from a sports standpoint? And in a broader context, just the general health of cannabis users and the health effects of cannabis, because while there is data out there, it's not very good. And a lot of it is also very old.
Yeah, like I think the oldest thing out there is like the endocannabinoid system, how it was like brought into it, and some of it's not even in the medical books quite yet. And you guys, are you guys do athletic stuff and outside of research as well. You guys understand like when you run, the runner's high is like sometimes associated with the endocannabinoid system and the endorphins and stuff like that. Like, what do you guys think about like the body's natural reward system for exercise and endocannabinoid system in cannabis? Like,
I think we know there's some intensity dependent kind of effects of endocannabinoids. Usually the more intense the exercise, the greater the release. Um, and we know that that's also associated with some of the, you brought up the runner side, but it's also associated with some of the feelings of pleasure and accomplishment that people often feel post-exercise as well. Um, and, whether or not that same level of response is kind of seen in response to cannabis, it's kind of up in the air right now. There was a small study published recently out of Colorado that actually showed cannabis users had kind of a blunted endocannabinoid response to a standard bout of exercise. Um,
Yeah, the Hollis
Take
and
it over from
is it Hollis and Chris
Taylor.
Bell.
Taylor
Yeah.
paper.
Yeah, and so when I think we graduated college at like around the same time, and it was like actually that same year that we graduated college where that was the first study that was done that showed at 45 minutes of moderate exercise releases the endocannabinoids into our bloodstream that helps give us that runner's high feeling. And so I'm obviously interested in the exogenous, like, using cannabis to kind of like mimic that feeling so you get that runner's high feeling earlier on. I'm not sure if that's like the exact mechanism of what's really happening there. But yeah, you get that runner's high feeling like if you consume cannabis before you go for a run, then you'd maybe have those feelings earlier on in the run response. And so potentially long-term cannabis use can actually decrease our body's endocannabinoid response to exercise, which is kind of interesting and
Yeah, so it's a
unfortunate.
little counterintuitive.
yeah.
Yeah.
Did they look at the CBD or was it THC? What did they look at?
I think they were looking at like circulating endocannabinoids. And so I
Yeah,
think it was
but
just
I
like
think it was
THC.
yeah, I think it was THC
Yeah.
cannabis.
Like, the recent movement of Schedule 3 cannabis was Schedule 1. Schedule 1 is versus like it's like heroin or like really bad narcotics, and now it got Scheduled 3 where it's like ibuprofen and stuff like that. What do you guys want to see the first research studies you want to see funded now that its federal barriers are finally lowering? Like, where do you guys see it going?
We were just talking about that before we jumped on here, and we're still like a little bit tenuous, I guess, because we're still like not really sure exactly what it means for the California State University system. When we first started, or like with talking to our risk management at our university, I asked if we could do research where people were actively under the influence, and they were like, absolutely not. Like, what are you thinking? No, definitely not. And the kind of scare tactic that they talked about was that because it's still federally illegal in that Schedule 1 status, then they could potentially pull all of the funding from our entire university. And so it was more of like, oh, well, like, what if this gets out that you guys are doing this kind of research and now our all of our student funding kind of goes away because you guys did this research. And so I'm still not quite sure exactly how our university system is going to respond to it. We did find there are a couple of ways that some different labs have found loopholes in being able to do research where people are actively under the influence. University of Colorado and Colorado State have really been like frontliners in the process where they have associations with some local dispensaries and they have participants go to those dispensaries. They'll pick up a product there, and then they'll have a van drive and park outside of their house, and so they can do pre-testing in the van, and then go back into their home and consume the product, and then come back into the van to do testing. Another model where they've had people uh, purchase a cannabis product from the dispensary that they have a partnership with, use in their home, and then they have to be within 5 minutes from campus to then like get over to campus right away to do a running study in the lab. when I asked my university if I could do that, they were like, absolutely not, you cannot do that.
Oh no.
But the little workaround that that I can do is that I can do research where people are under the influence in a cannabis consumption lounge. And
Okay.
so I actually did get approval from the IRB to be able to do research where we have people under the influence at a regulated cannabis consumption lounge in town. So there's these like little hopeful places here and there, but one of the things that comes up all the time when we meet with other cannabis and exercise researchers is that there's just not a lot of funding to do the research that we want to do. A lot of the money for cannabis research is mostly focused on medical populations for good reason, obviously, but we also know that people are using cannabis for recreational purposes, and there's not enough research to guide people's decisions in that way. And so we know that the that people want and need our research, and particularly with athlete populations as well. Athletes are just figuring things out on their own, not talking to their medical staff, not talking to their coaches, really like figuring things out on their own. And so that's why we really need to do this kind of research. And so hopefully there's going to be funding for it now, but
Ah,
yeah.
no, that sounds so exciting. Or what are some of the research that you have done in cannabis so far?
A lot of what we've done so far is just survey related research. And so that's kind of like the limitation on what we've been able to do so far. Where my students are presenting a poster session today on campus, and I'm seeing that our lumberjacks are out there, so they might hear a band anytime
Okay.
soon.
No worries.
Apologize in advance if they start playing. But yeah, the so we collected data at the Avenue of the Giants 10K half marathon and full marathon last May, where we just did a survey about their running experience, their running time, and their if they consume cannabis, information about their cannabis use. And we found actually 46% of the people that we surveyed use cannabis.
Oh.
And so it's something that we know people are doing, and so hopefully that research kind of sets the stage
Mhm.
to show us what we should focus on when we can do that research where people are actively under the influence.
Come with me to take a gummy and go on a run. And they're like really fun to watch sometimes. And I'm like, oh, that'd be so cool. Like I know that there's a brand out there right now that does specifically for runners. And
Off field.
yeah, it's super cool to see how it's all connected.
Like right now, people are kind of on their own to figure out what's the right dosage for them. So that's where it's nice that there's folks like yourself who are able to, communicate with patients to help them figure out what's that right dose for them. Because right now,
Right.
people are really just
You're
figuring it out on their own.
You're like flying blind. You're like, yeah, that gummy looks good. It did
I
nothing to me. They take another gummy and they're like, I hate it. I never want to do it again. And you're like, no, wait, like you didn't give it the chance. You didn't get the full education of like the terpenes like that are in the plant, the marijuana plant, like linalool, limonene, and like these are like so cool extracts that like come from the marijuana plant, like the CBG, CBD, CBC, and all that. It's so cool, like fascinating the educational standpoint of it. Sometimes I'm like in awe. Like I was like, I can't believe all this comes from the plant sometimes.
There's so many different variables related to cannabis. Do we want, I went through this last year with our students when we were trying to do submit our study for the IRB to do the study at the Cannabis Consumption Lounge. We were like, all right, do we want to do smoking or edibles? We're like, all right, smoking because of the faster onset time. And
Yeah.
so versus an edible where now their response, they have to stay there for longer. So it just requires more time from the participant to be able to be part of that research. And so then we said, all right, well, do we want to limit how they're smoking? And we're like, all right, yeah, we're just going to use joints as the method of consumption. Because like it could be smoking, that could be smoking a joint, a cartridge, a dry herb vape. Like they're even within smoking that like smoking out of a bowl, smoking out of a bong. There's so many different variables even within smoking. And then we got to, well, how much should we have them smoke? Do we want to see how many hits they've had? And then that turns into a small nightmare. We actually like tested it out. We're like, actually, how can people really write down how many hits that they have? And we're like, that's actually kind of difficult to do as you're
Yeah.
smoking. You're trying to like tally the number of hits you're taking. And then we're like, all right. does it matter how much they're actually smoking? Do we want to have a standardized amount of the joint that they have to smoke, or do we want to say just smoke until you feel like amount that you feel comfortable with, which is kind of where we landed, is that we wanted people to use in a way that they normally would, rather than saying you have to use this as a certain percentage of your body weight or something like that. It was like, all right, what actually really matters here is how people are really using it in kind of more naturalistic setting. And so, yeah, even within just doing one study, there's so many different variables related to cannabis. We also try to think about, do we want to limit it to a certain percent of THC in the joint? Like if there's a indica sativa or a certain like terpene profile, and then we're like, okay, no, we'll just let them choose and then ask them a question afterward about why they choose that product. And then given how they did on the specific test we were doing, would they choose that product in the future?
Yeah, that's it. It's such a big range because they could go like based off of their personality. It could be like type
Yes.
A personality picks this one, type B. It's like you can go so many different ways with that
Is
study.
the
That's
marketing. Yeah, the marketing can be really ahead of what the research shows. And so if there's like a product that's like, oh yeah, it's gonna improve your concentration. It's like, all right, come on. Like, how did you
yeah.
guys find out this improves concentration?
Yeah, no,
You have it on your marketing, but
it's always sometimes like when you see these labels sometimes like okay what's actually in this sometimes it's like you gotta like get deep down into the layers like reading the label sometimes could be a little bit hard because sometimes like it's like oh the serving size is like oh it's four gummies not one so in one gummy you divide that by four and I think maybe something that we've also been advocating for is like clearer labels like more just like straight up labels and just like, hey, this has this much in it, and this is how much you can start. Because like having labels out there that are just straight up like this is what it has. There's no like calculations out of it. Like I don't know how to read something. It's there. Just make it clear
yeah.
for people to understand. So since you are like a very endurance athlete as well, I've heard that a lot of athletes love CBD for sleep and stuff like that. What are your perspectives about that? Like the CBD and then the THC for like REM. What do you think is actually benefiting these athletes that you've seen so far? What you've seen?
Yeah, we really don't have really any sort of good idea. And you bring up something that is very much kind of a limitation in cannabis research, which is it's primarily kind of drawn down into THC cannabis or dominant cannabis and CBD dominant cannabis. There's not really been any other than maybe chemistry type studies. Nobody started to look at like the terpene profiles and the THC CBD ratios and or sort of all sorts of things like that. Um, in terms of sleep, I think we only really have some observational studies.
Like survey studies.
Survey, and I think the wearable company Whoop,
Mm.
they published some data because as part of the subscription, you basically agree that they can use your data for analytics. I think they published some data fairly recently looking at cannabis use and sleep along with other factors, but I don't recall kind of what they found. Um, Going back to the data from the 70s and the 80s, I believe the THC dominant cannabis tends to help sleep onset, so it will help you fall asleep faster, but it does appear to maybe reduce deeper REM sleep a little bit. So I guess that would depend on what's your goal. So if you're an athlete and you're playing a game at night, and the match finished pretty late, but you're still kind of amped up because of competition and all that, then maybe some cannabis would help you fall asleep faster. It may not be as restful of a night, but maybe you fall asleep a little bit faster.
About it's like you're you're competing really high in tournaments. Sometimes the tournaments are 10 o'clock midnight sometimes, and you have to come back again at 7 a.m. And it's like, how am I gonna function like this and just get like the best quality of sleep? And so
Right.
that's
How do you turn it off?
how do you
Yeah.
turn it off? That's like the million-dollar question is like, how do we turn it off? How do we get more sleep? How do we improve athletic performance? How can you enhance performance with cannabis? It's like, do you guys think cannabis can help you help athletic performance, or do you think it'll decrease athletic performance?
So I'll tackle some aspects of this, and then Whitney can kind of jump in with some of, I guess, some of the aspects that might be more beneficial. But I think from the standpoint of like looking at the Olympics, looking at most sports, there's very limited evidence for any sort of benefit. Um, I think the data suggest it um, it's not necessarily going to have a negative effect, but it's not going to really cause any sort of positive performance improvement. And I think that's pretty much what the studies on performance show. It's basically a mixed bag of either no effect or slightly worse, but not drastically worse. Um, and from my standpoint, and I know there is some data to kind of refute this, but from my standpoint, I don't think there's a ton of very high caliber athletes who are using and then going out and competing. Um, I think it's much more in the recovery space, whether or not, there's any science to support it. I think that's what the athletes have largely been sold on. Or they might not even be using it for athletic related purposes. It might just be, they may be managing other conditions, chronic pain. Maybe there's some mental health issues that they're managing.
Or just wanting to have a good
Or
time
yeah,
and
or
like
they're
don't want to
just
use
yeah, they
alcohol.
don't want to use alcohol,
Yeah,
which we know has a lot of negative effects on sleep and recovery, much, much more documented than anything for cannabis.
exactly. Yeah. And so with the World Anti-Doping Agency, that's the group that determines what substances should be on the banned list. THC has been on that list since like the 1990s. And because so things are on the list for you have to meet two of three criteria to be on the list. One, if it has the potential to improve performance. Two, if it has the potential to harm the athlete. And then three, if it violates the spirit of sport. And so, according to the World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, cannabis meets or THC meets all three criteria. They say that because it can help with sleep and reduce anxiety, then it could be a performance enhancer. A lot of those things are actually more related to CBD than THC, but
In their infinite wisdom, CBD is not a banned substance. So
yeah. And this is all based on a study that was done in 2011, and they haven't updated any of their references since then to create their policy. Then, because it can have negative impacts on like lung health and there's some cardiovascular negative effects as well. Then it meets that criteria, and then because it's illegal in most countries, they don't want athletes to be like bad representatives of their country and doing things that are against the law. And so that's why it violates the spirit of sport. And so,
I think there's also the connotation with cannabis that it's normally smoked, and therefore anybody who smokes anything, whether it's cannabis, cigarettes, cigars, whatever, that is not in the spirit of sport.
right, which is crazy because other countries are like fine with cigarettes like all over the place. But yeah, it is actually really hopeful to see major sport agencies really starting to change their policy, like the Major League Baseball and football, hockey, basketball, like basically like all of the major sport leagues have updated their policies, including the NCAA, to say that, we're not going to really test for this anymore, but if it does become a problem where there's other stuff going on, like you're not coming to practice, or when you are at practice, your performance is off, then it's more of an educational opportunity rather than we're going to fine you and you have to sit out an X number of games. And so it is really hopeful, at least in the United States and in Canada, that there are changes to the sport policy, like within our two countries, that's based in the reality of athletes, and trying to get professional athletes to not use pharmaceuticals because that ends up being a much bigger problem long term for those athletes compared to cannabis. But there's still a lot of things that need to be done in that world.
No, definitely. There's so much to it that meets the eye. It's not just like a one linear thing. It's like, oh, like maybe they were taking CBD for pain and stuff like that. And then, CBD is gonna have trace segments of like THC in it. It's gonna have like a 0.3% in it. And so there is always a possibility of like that trace mineral being in there no matter what, because it comes from the marijuana plant. So I totally understand that as well. And so um it comes back to like the stigma about it. It's like if you go back to the cause of it, it was because of racism and then the stigma around it. And it's like now to this given day and age, if you start saying cannabis, you're a cannabis educator, people think that you're like a drug dealer or like a pot person. It's like, no, no, no. It's just like I just really enjoy this educational segment of it, how it can improve people's like more holistic way instead of having like 800 milligrams of like opioids and stuff like that. They can have the CBD journey instead, or, maybe the CBG and stuff like that. The CBG is the mother of all cannabinoids and stuff like that. Do you guys think that instead of it being for performance enhancing, do you guys think it'll be more for like recovery, helping with like pain management? Do you guys think you'll be better off in that category versus the other one?
Think it'll be interesting to see, and related to the stigma piece as well. As a cannabis and exercise researcher myself, I was kind of nervous at first to even talk about my own use. But I think it's also important to for us as like, someone with I have two doctorates, for me to say I've been a daily or almost daily cannabis consumer for the entire time I was in college, grad schools. And so you can still like be a successful person and be a regular cannabis consumer. So I think it's really important for professionals to talk more openly about it. And I think that there is more of a lane for people to do that more often. And I've been actually hopeful with more high level athletes talking more about their use as well. And that some people are like, there's been like NBA players who are like, "Oh yeah, I definitely smoke before games sometimes." And so like there are some people who are talking more about how they use it with performance. But yeah, more recently with our research that we're presenting today about how people were using cannabis with the Avenue of the Giants marathon, actually, half of the people were saying that they use cannabis that it's like not at all related to their training. They're not using it before, during, or even after specifically for recovery. They're just like, this is just something I like to do. And so I think that's kind of an interesting piece that isn't really captured when you just test people for, how much THC is like in your P test. It's like it doesn't capture that just lived experience of a human and has nothing to do with their training at all.
And when people are ready to talk about it, they're ready to talk about it. It's a stigma. It's like we have to have open conversations like this. We have to be able to be vulnerable, be able to like get to the root cause of it. Growing up personally, like I remember it was like, oh my goodness, if you touch this, you're such a bad person. And it was like so scary. But then as the older I get, the more I'm like, oh wow, like this is so cool. Like I see people taking this for like seizures and epilepsy and some to help with agitation and Alzheimer's and stuff like that. And helping people with like pain as like an athlete and stuff like that, or just a regular person, just with general pain and stuff like that. And so it's super cool to see and just like the science behind it, the education behind it. And it's just we do have a very long way to go, but I'm so excited to see how it's gonna keep going from here and stuff like that. And it's like, I know that there's been a lot of like retired athletes. Like there was this one lady, she was like a former Olympic champion and she was just in so much pain and she turned to cannabis and she just was like a very big advocate. She's just very big about like the cannabis helped save her in a sense. And so like, do you think like people in the future would be like a long-term career longevity versus day-to-day recovery for cannabis?
Yeah, it's a good question. So with some of the research that shows that people do like run slower when they're under the influence, one of the ways that I interpret that result is maybe it's okay to run slow sometimes. And maybe that's going to be okay for you to have a couple of days where you're not going like hard every single day. And so maybe that is actually like a beneficial thing to consume cannabis and then allow yourself to run slower and not freak out for that like inner athlete in us that's like, oh my gosh, I have to like meet this, time, pace per mile that we have like within ourselves. And so hopefully it can take some of that stress away so that we can take a couple slow days and be okay with that, to help with the longevity. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, kind of on that same note, a kind of question I've always had is, how does it impact your ability to basically handle your training? Um, so for a given week or two of training, um, are you able to do more volume or does it cause you to do less?
Mhm.
Because if something allows you to do more volume, depending on your sport, then that's going to be more beneficial long term. Um, and we had kind of sketched out potentially exploring that in cyclists with CBD, but we chose to go with a short-term study instead of trying to do a training study to tease that out. But I think that's something that could be done in the future. Daily intake or daily supplementation over a 2, 3 week kind of training cycle to look at the impact on markers of overtraining, recovery, performance, because that can be a scenario for athletes. I've also had friends who have kind of been interested in, and this is less kind of athletes, more just people in general, how exercise might be used to maybe help manage withdrawal symptoms during like a tolerance break when people are going off cannabis for a while to kind of bring their tolerance back down. Um, because there's obviously some issues with sleep and vasomotor symptoms like night sweats and things like that happen depending on the person. I don't think everybody that uses cannabis gets those, but people that using it higher amounts probably more likely. Um,
Yeah, definitely.
so yeah, I think I think if you would ask most athletes, they're not thinking about it from the standpoint of I'm taking this to live longer, I'm taking this to get by day to day. And I think that's kind of how, for now, it's going to be pitched, at least to athletes. I think there is a longevity pitch coming, or that does exist out there, but that's kind of focused more on your average consumer, maybe your boomer consumer.
Like that's something that we would need to do more research on for sure in the future. Do research like survey research right now, with National Cannabis with John Hopkins as well. So like people that have started cannabis or are going to start cannabis should take the NCS and they'll get a $25 gift card. And then the ORR is a chance to win one. So it's like those that have taken cannabis before or anything like that, they go to that one. And it's just a collection of data. And so there's just so much education out there that I'm like, oh, like this is so cool, guys.
It's like I'm sure we could talk for like a full like 24 hours about cannabis and exercise
Yeah.
stuff. Um, but yeah, it's it's really interesting to see all the different ways that people can investigate this. We've collected a bunch of researchers from all over the world. Anytime that we see someone who's published something related to cannabis and exercise, we're like, "Hey, welcome to the club." There's not a lot of us, so come on in and let's figure out ways that we can collaborate. And so it's really cool to see that like I'm more of like the motor and psychological perspective. We have like exercise physiology, nutrition. We have people who are on like the cellular side. We have people who are focused more on like weightlifting. And so there's all of these really different people from all over, and we need all of it. We need to look at it from all these different angles.
Do you guys think like cannabis helps people decrease their heart rate or does it increase their heart rate when they're working out or just in a day-to-day general scenario?
So you think?
Yeah, so we definitely know that in response to just like acute consumption at rest, there's usually going to be an increase in heart rate. I'm thinking back to the two most recent studies we have. that kind of used a similar design. So both these studies, one used edibles, one used vaporized cannabis, but they had one after consuming, they came into the lab and then they rode the bike for 20 minutes at a fixed intensity, kind of like what we would say, like maybe moderate type exercise, measuring heart rate, oxygen consumption, all that stuff. And then they had them do a time trial or harder, kind of shorter, more intense effort. And in both of those studies, heart rate was pretty much the same, whether or not they'd used cannabis or not before exercise, during exercise, during exercise. So it was higher at rest, but then once you got them exercising, it kind of just washed out with the exercise data. It might have been a little bit higher with the moderate exercise, but the maximal, there wasn't a difference that I recall.
Yeah.
But it's not just the number that we kind of need to be concerned about with the heart rate. It's also the impact that it's potentially having on the heart's electrical activity as well as the heart's own kind of muscle activity. So there is some data to indicate that there may be a temporary suppression of some of the skeletal muscle nerves after cannabis use.
Yeah.
But again, we don't know. The long-term epidemiology research doesn't really bear this out in cannabis users. They don't have really higher rates of cardiovascular disease than the average population, but it's all just
Except
survey
except for
data.
except for the research that's like, let me like find this one example of
Yeah.
someone, yeah, of like,
The case reports basically where they go through and this one random ER, this one person
yeah,
who
Yeah.
got illicit cannabis.
exactly.
Yeah, like you know how cannabis is like a fat soluble, so it stays in your body longer. So say for example, like you took an edible, you were you get pulled over like a week or 2 weeks later, you get tested for THC, you get that positive. It's like sometimes it could be skewed and it's like maybe they aren't driving under the influence that day, but it's just like it's still in their system. And so some of these research reports of like, oh, most of motor vehicle accidents or stuff like that is like has this in there, but sometimes it could be misconstrued because it's like, well, maybe they took that a month ago, but it's still in their system. It's like, how can they actively test for what's actively in their system versus it being in their system prior before? So,
Not really, but I was just going to kind of piggyback off what you said, and I kind of wanted to bring this point up earlier for people that just don't quite understand, but the it's much more difficult to study a drug like cannabis than a drug like alcohol. We can fairly reliably predict how much alcohol you need to consume to hit a certain blood alcohol or breath alcohol level. And we know that biomarker data of cannabinoids, so like THC in saliva or urine or blood, doesn't scale very well with actual intoxication or like acute usage. Because like as you mentioned, most of the cannabinoids are more fat soluble and more fat-like molecules, and those have a longer half-life inside the human body, which means they are basically just hanging out for longer. And
they just hang
so,
out in there.
yeah, you could have not used for 2, 3, 4 weeks, but depending on the testing threshold, you could pop positive. And there was also a really interesting study. I'm not going to get all the details right here, that actually found that uh, chronic CBD usage combined with exercise could actually lead to positive drug testing, doping test using the WADA criteria.
I think CBD has the antioxidants, anti-inflammatory and stuff like that. And I think it should be more tested on that, especially for athletes and CBD. It's like if people want to take those high doses of CBD to help with an inflammation and stuff like that and anxiety with so much pressure on them, it could be helping regulate their system with the endocannabinoid system with CBD kind of comes into the CB1 and CB2 receptors. Some people end up trying CBD and they just have a more clearer mind. Some people just have less anxiety. It just depends on your endocannabinoid system because like your endocannabinoid system, yours is going to be completely different from mine. And our like threshold levels is like I'm a lightweight, I cannot handle THC, and that's okay. Other people can just take very high volumes of it, and it's like, hey, like what works for you works for you. It's all a trial and error. If this person has a higher pain threshold, they're going to need a little bit more. If this person has a lower pain threshold, they'll need a little bit less. And depending on their weight size and their age and stuff like that. And so it's a very big variable. There isn't just like a one size fits all. Like I wish it was like this amount of milligram, it'll help with this. It's not that way. Is there anything else that you guys see in like 5 years? Do you think we will see cannabis as a standard part of a professional athlete training kit? Just like electrolytes or protein powder, or do you see it not at all in it?
I'm not sure. I think that things definitely are changing and kind of going more towards that, but I think one of the things that I would like to see is, you know how at sometimes at running events there's like the beer tent afterward. I want to normalize having more cannabis options at those kind of events because alcohol, there's just so much research that says like how actually really bad alcohol is on our brains and bodies and psychological health. It's just like so many bad things about alcohol. So I really hope that there's more opportunities for cannabis at sporting events.
Yeah, that would be so cool, actually. That's why you see the big switch in the new generation that they're switching to cannabis. People like to be more in control with what they do, and people are becoming more educated about, oh, like I'd rather take a gummy than take a, X amount of alcohol drinks and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I want to leave with is from a harm reduction perspective, is that if you are a someone who works with athletes, like a coach, athletic trainer, medical staff related who works with athletes, it's really you really need to educate yourself on cannabis and start having those conversations with the athletes. Right now, the research shows that athletes are figuring it out on their own, and they're not talking to their medical staff. They're definitely not talking to their coaches about it. There's still a lot of that stigma that holds them back from doing that, and so they're trying sketchy things. They're doing different things that are maybe not good for them, and don't really necessarily have the skills to figure out like what product is actually good for me. Like because there's again so many different ways to use cannabis and so many different cannabis products that like where do you even start? How do you figure out what cultivar actually is good for your performance versus what are the ones that are maybe not good for you? And so I think it's really important for people who work with athletes to make sure that you start opening up that door for athletes to talk to you about cannabis so that you can help them work through what's good for them.
No, yeah. That's no, I really appreciate you guys being on the Tea Time with Rock.
Any views discussed here are not reflective of the California State University or our individual universities.